It's time to change the import rule. And if you are a team owner or a GM, you are watching this interview and you're like, finally, he's on our side. We've been saying this for years, and this guy has just sat around fighting us on this, and we're finally going to get this guy to cheer us on as we look to lift import rule restrictions, and those people are wrong. I'm going to talk about it in this video. But first, this video is brought to you by AWS. For those of you that don't know, AWS is a huge sponsor of LOL Esports. And I got to go do a really cool thing at Worlds in Korea the day before, where I got to go check out not only Game Day League of Legends Esports Edition, but also I got to attend a tech talk that they did there, learning and teaching people a little bit about all the cool stuff that they are doing, including working on these predictive data models and bringing data to fans in never-before-seen ways, but also working on the broadcast centers to make sure that fans can see League of Legends esports in the language they want all over the world. So it's just really cool to have things like this happening where you can go to one of these events and learn a lot about the different stuff that they're doing together. I got to meet a ton of cool folks on the AWS side, some of whom I had previously talked to, including Ashwin, who is a huge League of Legends fan who cares passionately about creating awesome products for League of Legends fans. So getting to hear him talk about all of that on the Tech Talk was remarkable. So either way, it's just really neat to see AWS creating these experiences and bringing cool opportunities for League of Legends fans. And I hope you can support them as they support me and the content that I create. All right, so there's a lot of confusion about the way that the import rule stuff works, and it's changed a little bit over the last, I don't know, however many years. And so I'm just going to go ahead and explain to you how it works so we're all on the same page. Basically, you are only ever able to field 2 non-residents on your team. What defines a resident? Well, let's take a look at the rule set. Under regional residency requirement in the LCS rule set, a resident is defined as a player who is either a citizen, lawful permanent resident, or the holder of special status in the United States of America or Canada, based upon the legal status of the region, or they are part of a limited group of grandfathered players, yada, yada, that's not as relevant anymore, or finally, part of a limited group of grandfathered non-resident players from Oceania who were granted status as a resident in 2021. But the next section says that a player may apply to become recognized as a import resident, which would allow them to circumvent the minimum 2. If the Section 1 thing is for really old players, so skip to Section 2, they start at least 50% of regular season matches within the region for 8 of the last 12 splits. And there's some stuff in here about Oceanic stuff because players who are Oceanic can count towards this, et cetera, et cetera. You can also prove that you've become a resident, which is basically the way the green card thing works. So the short of it is that if you've played for 4 out of 6 years within the league, you can apply to be considered a resident and not count as this like import situation. The other way you can do it is if you become a green card holder, you're considered a resident within the region, and that's what a lot of teams do these days. So I think a lot of people who are newer to the scene don't understand why, for instance, Sven is considered a resident or Core JJ is considered a resident. It's because players who have been here for a very long time, or in Core JJ's case got a green card, also he's been here for a long time, they don't count towards this rule. You get to play here as a resident, all that. A lot has changed since these import rules have been implemented and adjusted over the years. For instance, it is now really easy to get players a green card within the context of this rule set, right? It takes 4 years for a player to become a resident normally, but for instance, in the case of Inspired, it seems like he was able to get a green card within 2 years. Teams have gotten really good at this type of stuff. The league has now also gone down to 8 teams from 10, which is where it has been for the vast majority of the time. But also teams no longer are required to field an academy team. And so at the beginning of this year, we had about 20 different teams that were mandated by being involved in the league, right? You had the 10 teams in the LCS, you had 10 teams in academy. Now we have half of that, 10 teams, assuming both of the LCS teams that are running academy teams run them again next year in the NACL. So the amount of spots that are, I guess we'd say like league supported, has gotten slashed in half over the course of, 8 months or something like that, which is pretty crazy. Then we also had the Oceanic region essentially shut down and merge into North America. So those players are now able to be over here without taking an import slot. So if you are a player who lives in Idaho, who's maybe 15 or 16, and you are pretty good and you're looking at going pro, it's getting tougher and tougher to find a spot for yourself. And I think that is a bit of an issue. And I don't want people to misconstrue what I'm saying as saying Travis is anti-import player or he doesn't want people from other regions to come play in our league. That happens sometimes when I do videos like this because it's what people jump to, and I get it. They want to defend the idea that people from another place can come here and play. And I will defend that. I don't think there's any world where we should abolish the import rule and just make it so that only North Americans can play. I love a lot of the players who have come here and really committed to this region over time and the league and clearly care about it. Core JJ is a great example of that, but also Sven Jensen someday. Sadly, I think a lot of the players who are in that position are probably not going to be able to find themselves a spot next year because of the rules that have changed, right? Or they're going to be playing on some amateur team with a bunch of players that are maybe in high school and taking a spot in that development system, which is also a bizarre situation. So it's not that I am against players coming here or anything like that. I just think that it's also important for the league to feel aspirational for North American talent, for players who are here to feel like they have a spot and that they're not going to waste a couple years trying to go for something when the system says that they can't play here. I also think that we're in an interesting situation where teams who are trying to save money may now feel like, hey, a great way to save money is to hire somebody from a different region where the economics are different and they will be thrilled to play for a minimum salary in the league because that's fantastic for them based off of where they live and maybe not so great for somebody who is in North America who is talented. And I mean, I don't want to open that can of worms because that goes into a whole other thing, but I don't want fans to start to feel like the teams are becoming these kind of like corporations that are hiring talent from other places just to save money rather than because they want to develop them or something along those lines, right? We know what that song and dance is like from the corporate world, and I would hate to see that feel like something that is taking place within the LCS. So I think it's pretty clear that we're in a position where the rule set, the old rule set, does not hold up anymore to the changing ways that people can become imports quickly and the ways in which the league has changed economically, both in the way that they can pay players and also in the amount of positions that are available for North American talent to fill. So how do we change this? I don't think it's abolishing the import rule. I don't think it's making it so that players can't come here. I do think we kind of have two options. We can either take one or we can take both of them. I'm open to other ideas. Maybe you can leave one in the comment. But I think one option is to simply lower the non-residents that you are allowed to have on a roster down to one. Maybe there's a world where if a player has already played here, then they don't count towards this one restriction. You can have up to two of current players. I don't want it to become a situation where a player that's here is suddenly unable to continue to play here next year for their own team or for a new team within the league. But I do think there's a world where, like, hey, if you're bringing a player over here, you can now only have one non-resident. I think that is an interesting idea because, again, at the rate in which people can end up helping their players get green cards, become citizens of this league, I guess you could call it, you could still end up in a lot of situations where you have maybe two players who have been over here for less than 4 years but are playing on the same team. The other idea comes from a Hotline League caller, and I wish I remembered which episode this was on so that I could cite the person. If you remember and you watch Hotline League, please tell me, because this person I think deserves a lot of credit. I love this idea. This idea is to basically make it so that you give each team 2 import credits, essentially, and they give those credits to players. They assign them to a player. That player holds that credit for 2 to 3 to 4 years, however you want to make it. So let's take an example. FlyQuest last year brought in Prince and Vikla. Let's say this rule was implemented. They are now handing their import positions to Prince and Vikla as almost like a certificate that that player holds for the next 2 or 3 years. That FlyQuest doesn't get any more of those for 2 to 3 years. They can't then next year give out 2 to 3 more of these, or 2 to somebody, whatever. These 2 players hold these for 2 to 3 years. They can use those to play in the league, and they can use those to play in the league on a different team. So if at the end of this year, FlyQuest wanted to go in a different direction, the Prince and Vikla could go play for any other team in the league, because they hold on to those, and they'll hold on to them until FlyQuest is getting them back within the next couple years or something like that. Then you could have basically the same thing happen this year, where FlyQuest is supposedly running Whippo and Inspired. Those 2 players would have had their own certificates given to them from EG and Team Liquid. This is a great system, because I think what it does is stop the boomerang effect that I've talked about so many times on this channel and on Hotline League, where you have players come over here and then leave, and then the team just imports another player. Team Liquid is one of the biggest offenders of this. In the past, however many years, 4 years, I guess, they have had Impact as their top laner, then they had Alfari, then they had Whippo, then they had Summit, and now they're going back to Impact. I think that's not great for the league. I have a whole video where I talk about how it's not good whenever you cannot maintain players in your league. You invest all this time marketing, you make people a fan of Alfari. Well, never mind. At the end of that year, he's gone. Now you have to become a fan of Whippo. Well, never mind. Now he's gone. Okay, did we say Whippo? We meant Summit. Okay, now Summit's gone. Like, you cannot maintain fandom in the league whenever you have players rotating in and out. And so the system wherein these players hold the certificates is a pretty good one, because, one, it encourages a team to make a long-term bet on a player. If at the end of that time they feel that player is no longer compatible with that team, that player can still participate in the league. Hey, we became a huge fan of Whippo whenever he was playing for Team Liquid. Great. Well, now he has that certificate that he can go play on another team in the league. I was going to say 9 teams, I guess 7 now, options for him. And so that investment into that player has maintained within the league. They continue to be here, et cetera, et cetera. Team Liquid, sorry, your import player situation did not work out. Go find a really great North American player to start in the league and invest into them until you get your import slot back, or you could decide to grab another player from another team. Obviously, there's a world where the teams could game this system, right? You could have Team Liquid go to Immortals and say, hey, Immortals, why don't you import one of these players over with your import certificate, and then we'll acquire them from you. And now we'll run 5 imports using your certificate. I think the way that you work around that is you basically make it that whenever somebody comes over and assigns a player certificate, they're ineligible for trade to another LCS team for a period of a year, just to stop that. But then, once that's happened, Team Liquid could assemble 5 players that have all come from another region if they wanted to. But the idea would be that at least most of those players will have played in the league for at least a year, and so fans are familiar with them, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just the situation where Team Liquid balls out, buys all of T1 after they've won the World Championships, and feels them as the LCS team for the following year. So I really like the system. I think it's really cool. Maybe you end up in a situation where you're doing both of these things. Maybe you're only doing one of them. But I really like the fact that this does a good job of continuing to maintain the idea that players can come to this region, but teams have to make long-term commitments to these players and can't just bring them over here for a year and send them back to whatever region once they're done. And I think that's actually also really good for the player, because I don't think it's good for the players whenever they pop over here for 1 year and then have to leave afterwards. So anyway, I think that this is a pretty good way to deal with adjustments to the league. I think it's a good way to adjust the import rule back to the way that it was intended, and to make sure that North American talent can continue to participate in the league while also having great import players that come over here and continue to become long-standing members of the league as well. What do you think? Leave a comment. Let me know. And I really appreciate you watching this.